Did Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell fire his speechwriter? Appearing at Jackson Hole on Friday, he gave off a very different vibe than he normally does. In normal speeches and presentations that you see the Fed chair in, he comes off as an explainer or a teacher, telling you what he thinks is actually going to happen so that you can be confident in whatever it is that you're seeking to do. But this Friday was very different. Not only did the Fed talk about rate cuts and that they were basically a certainty, it was almost as if, no, not almost, it was as if Jay Powell was selling you on something. And what he was selling you was the fact that the Fed, or at least what he claims is a fact, the Fed conquered inflation, declaring victory in inflation. But that wasn't his whole purpose, and that wasn't his whole point. He was setting up this inflation idea because he knows the US economy's in deep trouble. And so what he was basically saying and selling was that if we got inflation right, then don't you worry because this unemployment monster that's already been unleashed will take care of that too. So he wasn't explaining about how the labor market was strong and resilient. He wasn't explaining about how the economy is going to sail off into the soft landing sunset. What he was selling was if we got inflation right, don't worry, because as unemployment has been unleashed, we'll get this one right too. Now, as we know, rate cuts do nothing for the economy nor unemployment. So, what is notable on this sales job at Jackson Hole is that implicit behind all of it is the Fed knows the unemployment monster has been let loose. So, Steve Van Meter, let's bring you in here. Mr. Powell, everybody in the universe was zeroed in on Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve, expecting him to say, oh, a couple rate cuts, we plan on doing it, the usual nonsense. He went way further than what maybe I think most people expect. He went way further than what you and I would recognize as a typical Jay Powell speech.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. I mean, this, as you said, was a complete sales pitch. It was absolutely nothing like you to hear him at your regular FOMC press conference or anywhere else that he might speak, because he really came out slow. And it wasn't just a soft sell. It was, look, we contained inflation. The government passed laws, and look how great that did. And we brought it down. And yes, we warned you that, things might get a little bit bad. And you know what? They did. But don't worry, because now we're on top of this. We're going to fix the labor market really quick here because we're going to do the impossible. And yet that was something, like you said, we just don't hear from him under that tone. And yes, he suggested, don't worry, there's going to probably be a rate cut, maybe even more than that. We don't know because we're going to rely on the data, which, Jeff, you and I already know. There's no chance this non-farm payroll report, unless there's some anomaly in it, is going to look fantastic. And so as long as the unemployment rate goes up at this point, the only question will be at the September meeting is how many cuts do we get?
Yeah, it was interesting about how much time he spent really setting up this narrative. You could tell it was carefully constructed. Like it went through a number of different layers of editing and everything. Again, it was not the typical Jay Powell speech. And even his manner in delivering it, it seemed he was a little bit different, as if he was either coached up or he realized himself, like, this is a big deal here. And the reason it's a big deal is because they got to sell you on the inflation thing. We're competent. We know what we're doing. We're going to we fixed inflation. We can fix unemployment, because he's got to sell you on being calm. He's got to sell you on, okay, this unemployment thing is happening. And it's a complete change in tone, which is why his tone changed too. Because up until now, everything the Fed has been saying is, oh, yeah, we're not worried about the unemployment rate. We're not worried about the economy. Everything is strong and resilient. And now it's completely 180 on the economy. Now he's saying, yeah, we have to cut rates. Now he didn't put it in those words, but that was exactly his meaning, is we got to cut rates. And if we have to, and he actually said this, if we have to, we've got a lot of room to cut quite a lot, which are famous last words that we heard from Ben Bernanke, famous last words that we heard from Alan Greenspan. We've got a lot of room to cut rates because you have to cut rates given the situation. So Powell actually put on a brilliant performance for what it's worth. And really, I mean, he came out there, and whether you believe him or not, that's a different story. But he actually sounded like he believed himself, which is what the best actors really aim to provide.
Yeah, Jeff, because he's got to keep the smoke and mirrors up and running so people will buy into it. And if they believe that he can fix the unemployment problem, then maybe people will go out and spend. But if he came out and said, hey, by the way, this policy lever that I have of lowering and raising the funds rate does absolutely nothing. And you know what? We let the genie out of the bottle and things are probably going to get worse. Well, the natural expectation is people are going to cut their spending because I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Maybe this trend in new orders is plummeting and the backlogs are getting worked through to nothing. That's not going away. Maybe my job is next, and they will react to that. But there is a sense that if enough people believe and they follow through and spend, that perhaps he can kick the can down road a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, that they've exhausted all of those ideas and excuses and everything else. That okay, we see the economy's a little bit weak, but that's not really something to be concerned about. His, like I said, his whole tone shifted. It was no longer okay, we can ignore all this weakness. He basically came out and said, what was it? The labor market cooling, he used the word cooling, is unmistakable. So everything that we said before, downplaying it, forget all that stuff. And I think that's really important to understand, that the Fed has completely changed its tone, its presentation, and therefore its forecast and where it thinks it's going. And so it's almost like Jay Powell. And the reason why I bring this up, and we were talking about this before we started recording, that the Jay Powell's whole speech and presentation shifted because it seems like he realizes this is his last chance. If he blows it here, if he can't get people to buy into this narrative, we fixed inflation, we can fix unemployment, it's already too late. The unemployment problem has already progressed too far, which is what he admitted, that we've seen the, not just that the rate's gone up, but how fast it's gone up recently. The momentum is all on the wrong side here. So everything is riding on this performance because, as you just said, Steve, his only chance here is not rates themselves, is that if he can get you to buy into the rate cut thing, then maybe you act as if you believe the rate cut, that it's stimulus and accommodative, and therefore you become the cushion to the blow from unemployment. And of course, that's what never works. But I got the sense, the way he put so much presentation and effort into it, very clearly into all of this, that he realizes this is my only shot. I got to take it, and I've got to hit it right here.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff, because his job is to keep up the mystique of the Fed. And he knows, I mean, he's not a dumb guy. He knows lowering the funds rate will do absolutely nothing for the trend in unemployment. Because if it did, we could go back in history and say, hey, look, unemployment started to rise, the Fed started to cut, and look, and maybe it was just a pause or something to slow it down. We never see that in the data, and there's just not one instant, and he knows it. But what he doesn't want to do is be late to the party by saying, we didn't do anything. And that's the issue. You know, we go back to the last meet. He wanted a cut. Not all the board members did. He's desperate to get one on the board because if the world starts to believe that central bankers have no power, no authority, well, that's a problem for them. And so what he needs to do here is get on this train, get it going quick, and say, look, we're cutting rates. We're doing our part. We fix one thing, we can fix another. And Jeff, you know what's going to happen. There's going to be some one-off event somewhere in the world, maybe here, and they're going to come out and say, oh, look, see, it wasn't our fault. We were doing everything we could. We know lowering rates creates jobs, but that event there threw the whole thing off. We're in a recession. It's not our fault, but we'll take rates to zero and you watch, we'll fix it.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's going a little bit further ahead. And that's unfortunately, that's what happens every cycle too, right? Is the Fed says, we've got this. We've got it all covered. We started cutting. Oh no, something happened. We couldn't possibly anticipate. We were joking about this before we started recording. In 1989, Alan Greenspan, the first intentional use of interest rate targeting to try to cushion the blow of a potential, actually not just cushion the blow, but actually avoid a recession. So Alan Greenspan starts to cut rates in late 1989, the middle of 1989, right into 1990. And the economy looks relatively good. It's holding up like it does every time before we get to a recession. And the Fed and economists all said, congratulations, Alan, you did it. Great job here. Oh, crap, there's a recession. And that recession developed and everybody said, oh, that was Saddam Hussein. It was the invasion of Kuwait. We could not possibly even darn that Iraqi army, that they spoiled our soft landing. And that's exactly what the Fed's going to do here. Because they're thinking further ahead, what Powell was saying, what everything is shifting. And let's not forget, too, that the markets have been pricing this very scenario. They have been saying that once the Fed starts cutting, it's not going to be one or two. It's not going to be 25 basis points in January, and then wait till, or 25 basis points in September, then wait till January. It was going to be a 50 rate from the start, maybe another 50, then a couple after that. And that's, Powell basically teed it up as, we're going to do everything we can. Trust us. We conquered inflation. We can handle this. And as you're just saying, we know what's going to happen. The markets know what's going to happen. Rates are going to go down, and they're going to have to find some kind of scapegoat that says, oh, this is the reason why we had a recession. Not that the rate cuts didn't work, is that something we couldn't anticipate happened in between.
Yeah, Jeff, because he wanted people to believe that he fixed inflation, which it was obviously going to get fixed when we reopened the economy and people went back to work and started saying, hey, we got a bunch of demand, let's build some stuff. But no, it had everything to do with the funds rate, the power of the Fed, and we're seeing that again. And he knows it because, as we see, they look at all the regional Fed survey data, and what do we continue to see one after another? Demand is going down. Hours worked are getting cut. We're still laying people off. The new order book's not there. We don't even have much in terms of backlogs. In fact, what did we just see recently in some of the data? It's inventory. That's what they've been building. They say, hey, these manufacturers think we believe in a soft landing, so we're going to build a bunch of inventory. Oh, wait, nobody's buying it. And Jeff, you and I know there's some point where you've got your inventory built, you don't have enough new orders, and you got a bunch of people standing around. You've got to send them home. He knows this is coming. He just doesn't know when. But as far as we can see, it looks like it could happen perhaps in the next couple of months.
Yeah, it really looks like more and more that things took a turn around March and April. I mean, we talked about this going back to last year, September and October. That was the first inflection. So we got the inflection in September, October, where things started to move in the wrong direction. And then it accelerated to the downside around March and April. And what was common to both of those periods? You had an oil price spike last summer. You had an oil price spike in January and February this year. You had insurance costs go up. You mentioned that right away. I think that was one of the first shows we did in 2024. You said, uh-oh, insurance costs are skyrocketing here. This is not going to work out really very well. And lo and behold, that's exactly what we see. So through this entire process, which goes back to last year, the Fed has been saying strong and resilient, got nothing to worry about. Now they're saying you've got something to worry about. And just as you were saying, Steve, everything that was supposed to pick up never picked up. And you get to that point where businesses are like, all right, I've been waiting for this economy to pick up. I can't wait any longer. So in many ways, what I'm saying here, and I think what we're both talking about here, is that not only is the Fed, okay, they're selling you on the inflation thing, we fixed it so we can fix unemployment, but they're also saying we now realize there's weakness. But in doing that, don't they actually make the situation worse? Because anybody that was out there thinking the economy is going to be picking up because Powell said it was strong and resilient, now Powell says it's not strong and resilient. And oh, by the way, we've got to start cutting rates because things are going wrong. Do we see a lot of businesses actually take Powell's signal and go in the opposite direction? They say, oh, maybe now we should start cutting workers. Maybe now's the time that we give up on the whole fantasy of a recovery.
Yeah, Jeff, because the whole belief is if we lower interest rate, it eases financial conditions, injects money into the economy, and everybody's happy. But what are we hearing from a bunch of retailers lately? Gosh, boy, if they would just cut rates, maybe consumers would spend. But the problem is consumers won't know any difference between a quarter point cut, a half a point cut, or even no cut. They just won't know any different. It's not going to change their spending habits here. And that's the problem. Is people want to believe this will work because they don't want to accept that, no, things are about to get worse. And we kind of hit a plateau. We see that from some of the retailers saying, hey, you know what? The good news is things didn't get worse. And so, but that's a problem because if they're not getting better, that's not the soft landing. In fact, that's what Jay Powell just said. Hey, things got worse. And that means, of course, we know over the next couple months, what we're likely to see is more and more people hit the unemployment line, even though initial claims are just outrageously low. You still look at continued claims, you're not seeing people come off their sofa, get back into the workforce. There's just no opportunity. And this is just a dangerous path because, yes, he can cut rates, but all it's going to do is tighten financial conditions even more and drive this thing right into the ground.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, the important point is now the Fed has changed its tune, saying, yeah, we see it too now. We actually do see it as well. And that the rate cuts themselves are, it's confirmation. It's not stimulus. It's not helpful. It's just, okay, we now seeing we're seeing it exactly the way the markets have, and commentary and companies and everything else. But also the fact that the Fed is now setting up for more aggressive rate cuts also is itself a signal as well, because one or two cuts, a couple gentle reductions in the interest rate in the end of the year is one thing where you could say, oh, it's just abundance of caution, no big deal. But preparing the marketplace, the economy, as the Fed is doing for, we're going to do something big here, probably in September, because it seemed like part of what Powell was saying is like, don't be surprised if we do a 50. That was part of the sales job too that I got out of him, was that, yeah, trust us here. So when we do a 50 basis point rate cut, don't be afraid. We're just doing what we have to do to respond to conditions. And that's inconsistent with the idea of an economy that's just fine and maybe softening a little bit as well. So almost everything about this performance was, it was a performance to try to distract you from exactly what he was saying, which was, we're no longer confident on the economy. We're no longer confident on pretty much anything. And we're going to respond pretty aggressively here because conditions have changed.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. Because even though the fact that we know cutting rates will have no effect, it's still about the mystique of the Fed. He should have cut rates last month to keep up the air of that they can fix this. But now he's behind the curve. But he just told everyone he's behind the curve. That's the worst part. He should have been like, hey, you know what? Maybe things are a little worse than we thought, but don't worry, we got this. But he really did come out and say, hey, we kind of screwed up here. We should have cut rates. Now we're probably going to have to cut rates a bunch. And then after that, we're going to cut them some more. And maybe just to be sure, we'll keep cutting them after that. And yet we know it's just not going to work at all. The only question then at this point is, what is the path? Where is the next leg down? When does it happen? It looks like it could be here this year.
Yeah, I think that, again, that's why the whole thing about inflation, he spent so much time on consumer prices, was because he was really trying to sell you that we got this, we did this, so don't worry about anything else. And to me, it came off almost as desperate, which is, I mean, given the situation that he finds himself in, that's not really a surprise. That when you've been saying the world is fine and then you have to act because the world is not fine, it's pretty difficult not to come off as completely desperate. But he's put himself in this box, in this situation, and we talked about this months ago. He should have declared victory back in March or April, and then he could have had more time to say, "Now we'll do this employment stuff." Instead, he waited and waited because they got fooled by gasoline prices and the CPIs and whatnot, and he waited too long. Just as you said, Steve, you said that he would wait too long, and now that it's here, it's like, okay, it's basically, it's all it is confirmation. He could try to sell you as much as he can, but it really, all it does is just confirm that everything that we suspected was true.
I just noticed something.
What?
There's a bear in my background at Jackson Hole. Oh,